My name is Rebecca Noonan and this is my presentation on ethnography. My student number is 30772098. I chose ethnography as my presentation because I like that it's a unique research approach and I like that it's able to look deeply into a subject or a phenomena, and that aligns very well with my ideas of how I'd like to do my own research, looking at how Indigenous knowledges and perspectives are integrated into the curriculum. So I hope you enjoy my presentation. So I'm going to start with some definitions around ethnography. So ethnography traditionally originated from anthropology, and it's a qualitative research approach that lends itself to deeply understanding people, deeply understanding their beliefs and knowledges, how they interact in their social environment, and the behaviours of small societies and cultures. It's highly immersive, participatory, and it requires observation over time, as well as the interpretation of a wide variety of data. So essentially, ethnography is a way for researchers to closely observe and describe people and their cultures. Traditionally, in scientific approaches or positivism, there's an idea about these testable results and the researcher being quite separate from the research topic or the participants of the research. So in ethnography, this is different in that it's very immersive and interpretive in nature, and it involves the researcher deeply engaging and exploring phenomena in the natural settings of a community or a space. And this provides rich and analytical descriptions of cultures and how they interact with a subject or an idea or whatever the researcher is looking into. So ethnography captures the way that human beings behave, and it provides an analytical description of culture and phenomena, but really it describes also a nuance that interplays between those aspects. It seeks to promote embedded research that fuses close-up observation, rigorous theory, and social critique. So there's some key concepts and defining features that sets ethnography apart. So number one, the researcher is highly involved in the topic or in the research, and researchers who engage with ethnographic methodology immerse themselves deeply into a community or an environment, and they participate perhaps in daily life. They might look for opportunities to analyze assumptions and cultural norms. And they seek to not just understand what people do, but rather how they interpret phenomena and the world around them. And this plays deeply into the subject matter at hand. So immersing oneself in the setting is really important in ethnography. And later on, I'm going to describe a research project that was exactly that, and it is to do with Indigenous curriculum immersion, and it was a time spent in a community. So that is where ethnography can be really valuable, and researchers would highly involve themselves in their subject matter. And it can be a physical space, but it can also be a digital or other space as well. So there's also a focus on context and meaning. So that is how researchers are interpreting the phenomena and how they're interpreting the meaning through their research. So it seeks, like I said before, not to just understand what people do, but how they relate in that context and how they make meaning of a subject. And that's including how the researcher makes meaning of the subject at hand as well. So in ethnographic research, there's a term called thick description, which is really this idea that ethnography can produce a very rich and detailed account of social and cultural contexts, and can focus on concrete life forms, on social rules and beliefs, rather than just accepting broader assumptions or understandings. It really looks deeply into the why and how, and this gives this thick description. So rather than having a prescriptive set of questions, an ethnographic research project would be looking more at the nuances. So perhaps there would be sets of questions, but you would be reacting and engaging in it in live time, in a real life situation, and looking for those nuances between. So there's also flexible evolving methods. So when you're having your research question, initially it will evolve over time as you gain more insight and understanding. And that's exactly how I feel I have engaged with my research question, even through these topics that we've been doing in our courses. But it's good to see that in a research proposal or a research action project that you can set out your questions, but then really look at how this will evolve over time. And that is through the ethnographic researcher gaining insight and understandings as they live in real time in the community or in the space, and having open-ended data collection, such as adapting their focus points, leads them on a journey through the research. Having an analysis of what's going on and focusing on those nuances of social interaction between people is a way for them to adapt their focus points and allow the research to be living and moving as they go on this journey. So that's also flexible methods can also include interviewing that's responsive and flexible, looking at the subject's perspectives and placing what lies behind those front and centre, whilst adapting to the cultural context of where the research is located. So also another part of the flexible methods, that's number 5, is looking at insider and outsider perspectives. So by focusing on the subjects in the research in a real world situation, rather than just the researcher dryly looking at a subject matter, you can then get this flexible method or flexible approach. Ethnography can gain deeper and more complex information and rich qualitative data that can allow the researcher to become more fluid and responsive to the environment in which it is based. So that complex and rich data is going to come out of the way that the research is designed and the way that the research is situated in the social setting or cultural setting. So the last, number 7, is about reflexivity, and this is really important for the study and it's really important for the researcher. So ethnography encourages researchers to understand and work with the fact that the cultural setting that they are researching within shape how people think, shape how they act, and it shapes their beliefs. So being reflexive to this as a researcher allows for a more truthful research to emerge and for the research to be like a living action or a dynamic process or journey. And within that, there's reflexivity of the researcher to be able to understand that the way that they ask the questions and the nuances that are coming up in between, they need to be reflexive to that dynamic process of research, but they also need to be reflexive in their own approach and their own worldviews, which I'll talk about a little later. So the typical applications of ethnographic research, there are some common variations or types of ethnographic research. So traditionally, the ethnographic researcher lives among the subject's culture and observes their daily life and gathers those thick, detailed descriptions. So that's the traditional ethnographic approach. There's also a critical ethnographic approach which focuses on the power and inequality and social justice. And researchers in this kind of critical ethnographic focus not only describe the culture, but they also challenge the oppression and aim to effect change. There's another aspect of ethnographic research called autoethnography, and that is when the researcher really turns that lens inward on themselves and uses their own personal experiences, their own personal learning and knowledges and beliefs as a primary source of data. So this is a bit of a blend of autobiography with ethnographic analysis, and it allows the researcher to reflect on how the self relates to the wider cultural context. I think it's important to note that those 3 can be highly interchangeable within one ethnographic research approach as well, so that you can kind of take little bits and pieces of these different applications. So there's also the virtual digital ethnography studies, which is where a researcher may be in an online community through social media or digital culture. And since this is a digital or virtual field, researchers can observe and interact in this space rather than a physical space. There's institutional ethnography, which is when researchers will look at how a subject or a community or a culture is shaped by broader institutional structures like laws and policies or organizations. There's visual ethnography, which is using photos and videos and other visuals to capture and interpret cultural practices. There's multi-site ethnography, which is a pretty important aspect of any ethnographic study, particularly for me looking at Indigenous curriculum integration. This is this idea, so a multi-site ethnographic research project would focus rather than just on one single location. The research would follow people and objects or ideas across multiple sites and places to understand connections and flows across them all. And then there's focused ethnography, which is quite different. That's a shorter, more targeted approach and often used when there's limited time or if there's a specific process, event, or group, and perhaps even within another ethnographic research process, you would have times of focused ethnography. So they are all quite interchangeable, and I think that there's many of those aspects that I would plan to use in my own research as well. So the procedures and techniques around ethnographic research, number one, and they're not in any particular order of importance, but this one is pretty important, authentic engagement. So one of the most important factors of ethnographic research is to spend time engaging with the lives of the study participants and their culture and society. And this is really about observing them, questioning, listening, and engaging in the nuances of the cultural environment and the real life setting. And these are vital factors to the ethnographic research. This is where all those little nuances come up. This is where the interrelating factors come in, and this is where researchers need to be really engaged and reflexive, because as you are going along and questioning and observing and listening, you're updating and I guess reframing all your ideas as you go along and being open to changing if needed, or responding if needed, I guess. So authentic engagement. And then another technique that's important in ethnographic research is the data collection. So in any research, it's important to collect a large variety of different types of data, but particularly in ethnographic, because you are looking at quite a wide spectrum and you're looking at all the nuances in between, you do need to have a wide variety of data, including your observations, your conversations, journal entries, questionnaires, artifacts, samples, and audio video recordings. Journal entries are quite important in an ethnographic study because that is where you may be able to pick up some of the patterns of the nuances and things that you're reacting to and engaging with as you go along with your study. A really important procedure and technique is reflexive research. So when you allow the data to emerge from the process of experiencing that daily life in the cultural setting, a wonderful flexible approach can occur where those thick descriptions can emerge and be collected. There's also this idea of starting out broad and narrowing down. So in ethnography, it's important to start the research from this broad topic and then zoom in based on the experiences of real life. And this allows for an in-depth analyzing and collection of data, and also for your research topic to be impacted by what you are experiencing in real life. Again, the reflexive practice doesn't just come into how you engage with the research project. It's also important for researchers to have this striving for reflexive practice in their research and in themselves, and their attitude. So being open-minded is really important in this area, because that is where you're going to see those variations of what it really means to be human and how we engage with subjects, and it's a vital part of that ethnographic research. So I wanted to highlight a bit of an example here of ethnographic research, a project called Wallumbah Warramildana, and this looked at the impact of authentic Aboriginal community and school engagement on teachers' professional knowledge. So here, this study explored the real-life experience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, their families and their teachers and principals, and it focused on those nuances that existed within the area of education and connection to community. So this study had multiple participants and communities involved, so you're getting that broad spectrum of multiple sites. There was a focus on how teachers respond to the needs of Indigenous students in a highly in-depth way. And there was an acknowledgement of, throughout the whole study, of this antecedent factors of the colonial impact on education for Indigenous students. This study really demonstrated the authenticity that is important in ethnographic research, in how the communities and the schools collaborated and how the relationship that they built, or that lack of relationship that was highlighted in the study that can exist, really impacts student well-being, success and engagement. So this process in this research project involved engaging with a number of ethnographic methodological approaches and to gain those thick descriptions. So this study has a number of examples within it that really highlight the important aspects of ethnographic research and methodology. So number one, I think, in this research project was this authentic engagement. So by authentically engaging with communities, schools, and principals, the researcher was able to focus on the relationships as being key to build this authentic and genuine engagement. So the framing of the dynamics between the school and the community was an important focal point that created a space for interactions, meanings and context to exist and to flourish, in fact. And then in turn, the researcher was able to analyse this and find out how the experiences of Indigenous children were impacted by the connection being strengthened between school and community, and principal, school and community. So there was a strong focus on the participation of the community members and the educators and researchers, and this ensured that real life voices and experiences were situated front and centre of the research design and implementation. It really looked also at how people engage with and live within the contextual phenomena of the community and the research topic, which is a key focus of ethnographic research, really looking into how those aspects impact human life and human behaviour. Number two, I think there was a strong recognition of historical impacts, and this is an important factor in any Indigenous studies. I feel that this study really highlighted how Australia's colonial history has shaped a socio-cultural disconnect between Indigenous students and their communities and schools and educators. So by situating the educational research against this historical impact of colonisation, the researchers could engage in one of the key ethnographic factors of broadening those contexts out to a much bigger, broader societal idea, and then narrowing it down to engage in really successful research with a fantastic outcome. So number three was this multi-site approach. So that's another really important factor in ethnographic research, and you can see it clearly in this study, where sampling across multiple sites allowed for the researchers to gain a deeper and more nuanced set of data and understandings which could emerge. There was a number of schools involved and a number of communities, and that broadened that research topic out, and researchers were able to gather information from a great range of communities and schools. Lastly, teacher knowledge. So there was a big emphasis on how the teacher knowledge strengthened and grew through this engagement with the Indigenous community. There was a focus on teacher reflexivity and looking at relationality and how teachers view themselves and the world. And often a teacher may not experience this if they're not out in that community, in that space. So for a researcher to come and engage in a research project such as this, they're really going to be able to push that reflexivity for educators and get them to question their worldviews and create, like, agitate for that change, I guess. So yeah, I think that brings me to some strengths of ethnographic research, which have been highlighted throughout the presentation, but I guess these are some of the really key strengths that I see. So it's flexible and nuanced. So you're able to respond in real time. You're able to really get to the heart of a subject, and create as much space as possible for these nuances to come out to inform your research. There's a deep and authentic engagement, particularly if you're out in a physical space, but even online in any space when you're really deeply engaging with a culture or a community, or a subset of people, you're getting this deep and authentic engagement. And if you really are open-minded and reflexive, then you're going to find out a lot more of what lies behind the subject that you're researching. There's a real life engagement as well. It's meaningful, it's purposeful, it's engaging with what is happening in the world right now. There's a thorough uncovering of gaps and misunderstandings. So being able to have this really broad picture, narrowing down, looking at all of the what lies behind, you're getting to the heart of these gaps and misunderstandings, which really then create theories that can emerge from this data rather than being set by a strict parameter. That's what I love about ethnographic research, is that theories can emerge and it's living. So being able to also investigate a broad spectrum of topics in this deep and authentic way across multiple sites, in a living and dynamic way, is a real strength of ethnographic research. So there are some limitations. Obviously, having such a broad topic with so many, multiple aspects to it, it's highly complex. And I guess the more fluid or the more flexible that you are with your research, then the complexity perhaps heightens or is created. So researchers need to be open. They need to be able to engage in that reflexive process and dynamic research. And they need to be curious and open-minded to what may come about on that journey. So not only in the research, but in themselves and their beliefs and assumptions and perhaps biases as well. So there's detailed planning that would be required in this, but also an adaptability or a flexibility. So an ethnographic researcher really then needs to be flexible and open-minded. They need to have this as their approach. They need to be able to immerse themselves into a community or a setting. They need to demonstrate cultural understanding and respect. They need to demonstrate an understanding of historical impacts on the cultures that they are researching. They need to have excellent communication and listening skills, an organised attitude and self with an ability to make connections, notice those nuances and respond accordingly. And that brings into the reflexivity in their own approach to their research, but their worldviews as well, and the nature of ethnographic research. And also to adhere to this ethical considerations, particularly being in a community or in a space. They're going to need to be really aware of the ethical considerations of ethnographic research, which are, so researchers need to be aware of confidentiality and privacy of the participants that they're working with and the communities where they are. They need to ensure that the research is going to be mutually beneficial, not just for their benefit and their research, but really to be able to add some change, some positivity for communities and research participants to agitate and affect for that change and ensure that it is change for the good of the participants, their society and their culture, not just the researcher. They also need to demonstrate a strong cultural awareness and a respect and understanding for cultures, and adhere to any traditions or cultural nuances and requirements that exist. And that is where that open-mindedness and curiosity will come in. They need to be aware of the dynamics of power differences that exist, and this history that, particularly in Indigenous research, is long and vast, and we need to have an understanding of where our relationality is, and where we're situated in our power differences, to be able to really tap into those social cues and understand the political impacts as well. So they also need to ensure that no psychological, physical, or emotional harm is impacting the participants, particularly if there is an aspect of looking into those historical impacts of something like in an Indigenous research, looking at those historical impacts of colonialism. So understanding that, the research should do no harm. So, in conclusion, ethnographic research does provide a very rich and meaningful methodological approach. It can explore a wide range of topics and phenomena. In my own research of looking at ways in which Indigenous ways of knowing and perspectives are integrated into the curriculum, I believe that ethnographic research would be highly effective for my research project. The strengths that exist in ethnography within the ability for this method to engage Indigenous community members, educators, and research in a real life, dynamic, and flexible research approach that's really going to dig deeper than just a qualitative research or quantitative research method alone could achieve. So the opportunity for researchers to engage in these reflexive research methods while challenging their own assumptions and beliefs and knowledges lays down the foundation for this authentic research to occur, and for the researcher to really get to the bottom of what is going on and behind what's really going on in the subject. So through having this careful research design and a flexible and dynamic approach, ethnography can be a really powerful way to approach research, particularly in the field that I wish to research, which is Indigenous education. So I've put my references in here. One of the books that I really enjoyed reading was the Harrison Introduction to Ethnography, and there was a couple of really powerful peer-reviewed journals in there, so the Howell Journal and the Hammersley Journal. And then Lau was this Wallumbah Warramunda project of authentic Aboriginal community and school engagement, which was really amazing way to connect with my own research topic, and of course our textbook with Yin, that qualitative research from start to finish. So I hope you've enjoyed my presentation and learnt a lot about ethnographical research. Thank you.